Hello and welcome to Emirates 24/7.
Lots coming up tonight.
Better safe than sorry. Off the back of yesterday's tragic JLT fire, a survey finds that 86% of residents are without home contents insurance.
Questions remain over the exact cause of yesterday's Tamwil Tower fire, which led to the 34-story building to be evacuated.
Dozens of families have been forced to seek shelter elsewhere after the near 7-hour inferno gutted the building and destroyed millions of dirhams worth of personal items.
Now, many of these families now find themselves in a very difficult situation, with SouqAlmal.com survey revealing exclusively to us that 86% of UAE residents do not have home contents insurance.
Well, joining us now in studio to tell us more is Ambareen Musa, the founder and CEO of SouqAlmal.com and one of the people behind the survey. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, of course, for sharing the results of your survey exclusively with us on the show. Looking at the survey, just to take us through it in brief, I guess, what were some of the highlights to your mind?
Well, when we first decided to launch the insurance section of SouqAlmal.com, we wanted to get a better understanding of what were people thinking about insurance, content insurance, and whether they were receptive to it. Interestingly enough, so the survey was very much focused on what the behavior was in terms of taking content insurance for them. And interesting enough, 86% of the respondents did not have content insurance. That wasn't too shocking for us. I think the number that was really shocking for us is with the 52% who didn't really think it was a priority for them. And 20% of those thought that they told us that they didn't really know the process or wasn't even aware that they could actually insure their contents.
Why do you think we're seeing these kind of figures when it comes to home insurance? Are people just lazy? Do they have misconceptions that it's difficult? I've got home insurance. It took me 30 minutes to set up online. It's so easy. Again, you renew it online every year. And just think you do have to be cautious about this. Why are the figures so low then for the UAE?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think one of them is it is a transient population. We're here for a couple of years and then we leave. We don't really think that what we own here is very permanent. But what we do forget is if we're not too concerned about our own contents, as tenants, we are liable to other tenants around us, so our neighbors, and we're also liable towards our landlord. That's a very important part that a lot of people are not aware of. I think the second part as well is a lack of awareness. So 20% in the survey told us they really didn't really know what the process was, and I'm glad you've found it very easy. A lot of people kind of thinking, you know, I have to go back and look at all the receipts and take photographs and etc. And they're kind of taken aback by that. There is another perception which we found was people thought it was expensive. We talked about it earlier on. You can get content insurance or home insurance as low as 500 dirhams, depending, of course, on your particular situation, the amount of the contents, or is it only the building you want to actually cover?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you touched on it there briefly, but I mean, I guess looking particularly obviously at the building fire that we saw, yesterday at Jumeirah Lakes Towers, millions of dirhams of damage there in terms of personal effects, and although we don't have the full figures out, there are many who were not insured. Again, I mean, why do you think there is this confusion over whose responsibility it is when it comes to these kind of events? Many of the residents did think they were insured because the building was insured. Of course, that's not really the case. I mean, you mentioned that lack of awareness, but I mean, it seems like a fundamental thing to be concerned about when it comes to your belongings.
It is very fundamental. I think that's one of the biggest questions in everyone's mind. Who is responsible is always a big question mark. Generally, the general rule is really if you're a tenant living in a certain property, you are responsible fully for that property. If it's your fault or something happened that the domestic worker at your house forgot the stove on, it is unfortunately your responsibility towards the landlord if there's any damage to property. Eventually, if it's really a big fire to the building or anything else, then they will have authorities that come in and will decide actually what happened, get down to it, and also decide whose responsibility it would be.
Mm-hmm. I know for me personally, I've got contents insurance, but yes, I've also got that renter's insurance as well, and I think that's what people need to understand. They really need to be covered for both to be completely protected. Now, you touched on domestic workers. There can often be some concern there as well. Are they typically covered in house insurance? Is that something extra you have to apply for, and why is that so important?
So generally, the domestic helper is part of your household. So whatever happens or whatever they do is really the responsibility of the employer. So it's not just you or your kids who could potentially do something wrong or as an accident. You are responsible for them as well. Now, this is what we actually do. We actually took all the policies that exist in the UAE and put it all together under one roof. And it's really about the features of each policy to really understand what each policy covers. So for example, touching on that, some of the policies would cover the domestic helper for injuries, for medical options. Some of those won't. So it's really optional, and it's for you to do your homework before and find out which policies do cover the worker and which doesn't.
Absolutely. It's definitely an issue which, I mean, you said you weren't shocked by the figures. I am to a certain extent. But it's definitely something which obviously needs to change. And as tragic as it is, we do hope that incidents like the fire yesterday help to raise awareness when it